I remember the exact texture of the mahogany booth when my wife destroyed me in front of her family. Sticky varnish, someone's initials carved into the wood grain under my palm. I traced them while Vanessa laughed at her own joke about my irrelevance. The restaurant was one of those places that thinks it has class because the steaks cost $40 and the bartender wears a vest. Rick Mercer, my father-in-law, loved it here. Every Thursday night, same booth, same waitress, who called him Mr. Mercer like he was somebody important. Which, in this Rust Belt city, I guess he was. Mercer Industrial Solutions, regional logistics, and supply chain management. I was there because Vanessa insisted. Family dinner, she'd said that morning, not looking up from her phone. Dad wants to celebrate. Celebrate what? She didn't say. She never did anymore. The booth curved around a table meant for 6. Rick sat at the head, naturally, his silver hair still thick, his jaw still square, despite 63 years of gravity. Next to him, my wife, Vanessa Mercer Cole, though she rarely used the Cole part anymore. 32 years old, blonde highlights that cost more than my car payment, wearing a black dress that showed exactly enough collarbone to remind everyone in the room she was worth looking at. Across from her, Brandon Hale. That should have been my first clue something was wrong. Brandon worked for the company. Sure. Accounts development, whatever that meant. Late 20s, the kind of jawline that suggested his parents had money for orthodontics, wearing a watch that was either a really good fake or a really bad financial decision. But he wasn't family. He wasn't even senior staff. Yet there he sat, grinning like he'd earned the seat. I was wedged in the corner, naturally. The position you put someone when you want them present but not participating. So Ethan, Rick said after the waitress took our drink orders, Vanessa tells me you've been busy with the quarterly reports. The way he said it made busy sound like a hobby, like I was building model trains in the basement. Getting there, I said. The supply chain numbers are tricky this quarter. Fuel costs are up, and the Minnesota contracts need renegotiation before we... God, babe, can we not? Vanessa cut in, her hand already reaching for the wine glass that had just arrived. It's a celebration dinner. Nobody wants to hear about spreadsheets. Rick chuckled. Brandon smirked into his bourbon. Right, I said. Sorry. Vanessa leaned back against the leather, her shoulder touching Brandon's for just a moment. A casual thing, probably accidental. So, Dad, tell Ethan the news. Rick raised his glass. Vanessa hit her target, 3rd quarter in a row, top salesperson in the company. Again. Crushing it, Brandon added, like his opinion had been requested. I raised my glass because that's what you do. Congratulations. Thank you, baby, Vanessa said, but she was looking at her father, not me. It feels good to carry the weight, you know. For both of us. The table went quiet for just a second. That specific kind of quiet where everyone heard what was actually said, and now they're waiting to see if anyone will acknowledge it. Rick cleared his throat. Brandon studied his drink. Vanessa smiled, sweet as antifreeze. I mean, she continued, her voice lilting up into that fake playful register she used when she wanted to disguise a knife as a joke. It must be weird for you, right? Watching me close deals and win awards while you just orbit. Brandon snorted, actually snorted. Something hot moved through my chest. Not anger yet. Anger requires surprise. This was more like recognition. The moment you realize you've been reading the situation wrong for months, maybe years, and now the real picture is snapping into focus. Van, Rick said, his tone suggesting he wanted her to ease off, but lacked the spine to actually make her. What? I'm teasing. She reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a child who'd scraped his knee. Don't pout, Ethan. You're so sensitive. I looked at her hand on mine. Her wedding ring, white gold, small diamond. I'd saved for 3 months to buy it. She wore it every day, but I couldn't remember the last time she'd touched me with anything resembling affection. I'm not pouting, I said quietly. See, sensitive. She pulled her hand back and laughed, the laugh she used for clients. Bright, confident, designed to make people lean in. God, I love you, but sometimes you need thicker skin. This is business. You understand that, right? I didn't answer. I was watching Brandon, whose hand had slipped below the table. I couldn't see where it landed, but I saw Vanessa's posture shift. A small lean, a tilt of her hip. The kind of adjustment you make when someone touches your thigh under a table and you don't want them to stop. The waitress returned with appetizers. Calamari nobody asked for, but Rick always ordered. The conversation moved on. Supply chain logistics, client retention, a competitor in Pittsburgh who was undercutting margins. I participated where required, gave short answers, watched. Brandon's shoulder brushed Vanessa's again when he reached for his glass. Her knee angled toward him. At one point, she laughed at something he said and touched his forearm, fingers lingering. Rick didn't notice. Or he did, and he was pretending not to. The entrees came. Steak for Rick, salmon for Vanessa, something with chicken for Brandon. I don't remember what I ordered. I was busy doing math in my head. The kind of math that has nothing to do with quarterly reports. How long had this been happening? Weeks? Months? Did everyone at the office know? You okay, man? Brandon asked, his voice low enough that it was meant just for me. Concerned. Almost kind. You seem distant. I looked at him. Really looked. He was younger than me by maybe 6 years, but he had that specific confidence that comes from never being told no. Good-looking enough to get away with average competence. Gym body under an expensive shirt. The kind of guy who called grown men buddy and women sweetheart and somehow made it seem charming instead of condescending. I'm fine, I said. It's 2025, you know. He leaned in, like he was sharing wisdom. Nothing wrong with being support staff. Vanessa was watching us, not intervening. That was the moment. Not the humiliation at dinner, not the jokes about orbiting. This, the fact that she sat there sipping her wine, while her lover explained to me that I was irrelevant, and she let it happen. You're right, I said. Brandon blinked, surprised I'd agreed. Exactly, he said, relief flooding his face. See, Ethan gets it. I smiled. Yeah, I get it. The rest of dinner blurred. Dessert, coffee, Rick talking about retirement plans and legacy and how proud he was of Vanessa. Brandon interjecting with compliments that were just inappropriate enough to sting. Vanessa glowing in the attention, her hand occasionally brushing Brandon's arm, her laugh too loud, her eyes too bright. I sat in my corner and traced the initials carved into the booth and decided something very quietly. When we stood to leave, Brandon clapped me on the shoulder. Good talk, man. You're a good dude. I nodded. In the parking lot, under the halogen lights that turned everything the color of old bruises, I watched Brandon walk Vanessa to her car. Our car, technically, though she drove it more than I did. He opened her door. His hand touched the small of her back. Lingered. She didn't pull away. Rick was already in his Lexus, engine running, oblivious or choosing to be. Vanessa pulled out first. Brandon followed in his wrapped Audi, silver with black trim, the kind of car people buy when they want everyone to know they think they've made it. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, breathing the exhaust and the October cold. Then I got in my car and drove home. While you're here, hit the hype button, don't forget to subscribe, and support this channel with a like. And tell us below, have you ever faced something like this? Our condo was in one of those redeveloped warehouse districts where they gut the industrial bones and fill them with exposed brick and stainless steel appliances and floor-to-ceiling windows that make you feel like you're living in a display case. Vanessa loved it. It's us, she'd said when we signed the lease. Modern but grounded. I hated it. Too much glass, too much echo. You couldn't have a private thought without it bouncing back at you. She beat me home, which wasn't unusual. She always drove faster than me. Parked crooked in her spot, left her coat on the chair instead of the closet, dropped her purse on the kitchen island. I could track her movement through the space by the debris field. I found her in the bathroom, door open, removing her makeup with the expensive cream that came in a jar the size of a shot glass and cost $60. "Good dinner," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She agreed, not looking at me. "Dad's so proud. Did you see his face?" I did. 3 quarters in a row, Ethan. 3. She smiled at herself in the mirror. "I'm on fire." "You are." She paused, makeup remover pad hovering near her cheek, eyes flicking to meet mine in the reflection. "Are you mad about earlier? The teasing thing?" "No. You seem mad." "I'm not." She shrugged and went back to her face. "Okay, good, because it was just teasing. You know that, right? I didn't mean anything by it." I watched her remove the mask she wore for the world, one careful swipe at a time. Foundation, blush, the contouring that made her cheekbones look sharper than they were. Underneath, she looked tired, small lines around her eyes, a tension in her jaw she hadn't had when we met. "How long have you been sleeping with Brandon?" I asked. Her hand stopped, for just a second. Then she laughed, light and airy, and kept wiping. "What? How long?" "Jesus, Ethan, are you serious right now?" "Yes." She turned to face me, pad still in hand, her face half clean. "You think I'm sleeping with Brandon? Brandon Hale? From work?" "Yes. Why would you think that?" "Because you are." She stared at me. Then she shook her head and turned back to the mirror. "You're being paranoid. And honestly, kind of insulting. Brandon's a colleague. That's it." "He had his hand on your thigh at dinner." "No, he didn't. I watched him." "You watched wrong." Her voice was getting sharper. "God, what is this? Are you trying to start a fight because I got another award and you didn't?" "No." "Then what?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. She threw the makeup pad into the trash can hard enough to make a point. "I'm going to bed. You can stay out here and have whatever weird insecurity spiral you're having, or you can come to bed and act like an adult. Your choice." She pushed past me, shoulder hitting mine, and disappeared into the bedroom. The door didn't slam. That would have been too obvious. It just closed with a soft, final click. I stood in the bathroom doorway for a while, looking at the mess she'd left. Cotton pads, Q-tips, the cap off the expensive cream, the faucet still running, just a trickle. I turned off the water. Then I went to the kitchen and opened her laptop. She never logged out. Why would she? I was her husband. We trusted each other. That's what marriage meant. Her email loaded, work account, personal account, both open in tabs. I started with personal, scrolling, receipts for clothes, newsletters she never read, calendar invites for work events, nothing. Then I clicked on a subfolder, sent items, filtered by recipient. There, hotel confirmation. 2 nights next weekend. King Suite at the Riverside downtown. Booked under her work alias email, the one she used for privacy with clients. Guest name, V. Mercer and B. Hale. I stared at the screen until the words stopped meaning anything and just became shapes. Then I forwarded the email to myself, deleted the sent item from her outbox, cleared the trash, closed the laptop. I sat in the kitchen, in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. At some point I got up and walked to the bedroom door, put my hand on the knob, imagined opening it, imagined asking her to explain, imagined her crying, apologizing, promising it was a mistake, imagined believing her. I took my hand off the knob. Instead, I went to my office. The spare bedroom we'd turned into a shared workspace, though really it was just mine. Vanessa never worked from home. Too boring, she said. She needed the energy of the office. I pulled up the files I kept locked on my personal drive. The ones nobody asked about because they were boring financial documents. estate planning, tax shelters, corporate structure memoranda from 6 years ago when Mercer Industrial nearly went under, and Rick Mercer, desperate and drowning, signed over controlling interest to the only person who could save him. Me, 77% voting shares, held through a layered LLC structure for tax purposes. Rick kept 49%. I gave him enough rope to feel like he still owned his legacy, and he gave me enough power to make sure it didn't collapse. It was supposed to be temporary, a crisis measure, but Rick never asked for the shares back, and I never offered. Eventually, it just became the way things were. The quiet truth nobody talked about because talking about it would require admitting Rick wasn't really in charge anymore. Vanessa didn't know. Rick preferred it that way. He liked the story, where he was still the founder, still the king. Having his son-in-law actually own the company would complicate the narrative, so we just didn't mention it. And I went along with it because I loved his daughter, and I thought that mattered more than paperwork. I looked at the documents for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. When I was 12, my father told me something I never forgot. We were ice fishing, sitting on a frozen lake in silence, because that's how he preferred things, and out of nowhere he said, "The worst thing you can do to a man is let him think he's won before the game is over." I asked him what he meant. He said, "When you know you've lost, you prepare, you adapt, but when you think you've already won, you get sloppy, and that's when someone takes everything." My father died when I was 19, heart attack. He never met Vanessa, never saw me build anything. But I remembered that day on the ice. I remembered the cold. And sitting in my office at 2 a.m, staring at corporate documents that proved I owned the company my wife thought belonged to her father, I finally understood what he meant. Friday morning. The office always felt different on Fridays. Looser. People wore jeans. Coffee conversations lasted 5 minutes instead of 2. The warehouse guys cranked the radio loud enough to hear from the executive floor. Mercer Industrial Solutions occupied a refurbished brick building in the industrial district, 4 stories of exposed ductwork and polished concrete floors that Rick loved to show off to clients. "History in progress," he'd say, gesturing at the I-beams. "That's what we are." What we actually were was a regional logistics vendor with decent margins and a client list that hadn't changed much in 20 years. We weren't Amazon. We weren't disrupting anything. We were just competent enough to stay profitable and boring enough that nobody tried to buy us out. I liked it. Boring was safe. Boring was predictable. Or it used to be. I got to the office early, before the warehouse shift started, before the admin staff arrived. The building was cold. The heat didn't kick on until 7. I walked through the empty operations floor, past the rows of desks where Vanessa's sales team sat, past the glass-walled conference rooms, up the stairs to the executive level. Rick's office, corner space, big windows overlooking the loading docks. The door was open. He was already there, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, reading something on his computer with the intensity of a man who still believed every email was important. I knocked on the door frame. He looked up, smiled. "Ethan, early bird. Had some things to finish before the weekend. Come in, come in." He waved me to the chair across from his desk. "Hell of a dinner last night, huh? Vanessa's on a tear." "She is. 3/4. 3. He shook his head, proud and amazed. "I don't know where she gets it. Her mother was never that driven. Must be from my side." I smiled, said nothing. He leaned back in his chair. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. Semi-sensitive." "Okay. Brandon Hale." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "What about him?" "Good kid. Young, ambitious. Vanessa speaks highly of him. But..." Rick paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm hearing rumors. Nothing concrete. Just talk." "What kind of talk?" "That he's getting a little too close to some of the sales team. Favoritism, maybe. You know how it is. People get jealous when someone rises fast. I nodded slowly. HR issue. Potentially. Rick rubbed his jaw. I don't want to make a big deal out of it if it's nothing, but I also can't have client relationships compromised because someone thinks we're playing favorites. You understand? Completely, he sighed. I hate this part of the job. The politics. I just want to move freight and make payroll. What do you want me to do? Keep an eye on it, quietly. You're good at reading the room. If you see anything that feels off, let me know. We'll address it before it becomes a problem. I let a moment pass. Then I said, what if the problem is already there? Rick's eyes sharpened. You've seen something. I've heard things. Like what? Like Brandon and Vanessa might be closer than appropriate for a manager and direct report. The office went very quiet. Outside, a truck engine turned over. Someone laughed in the warehouse below. Rick's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Where are you hearing this? Around. From who? Does it matter? He stared at me. You're telling me my daughter is sleeping with an employee. I'm telling you it might be worth asking questions. Bullshit. The word came out hard. That's garbage office gossip, and you know it. Vanessa's smarter than that. She wouldn't risk her career for some kid half her age. He's 28. Whatever, she wouldn't. I didn't argue. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, waiting. Rick's jaw worked. Did you ask her? I did. And? She said I was being paranoid. Well, maybe you are. He stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the loading docks. His back was to me. Vanessa's under a lot of pressure. Top performer 3 quarters running. That brings attention. Some of it good, some of it ugly. People get jealous. They make up stories. Maybe. You think I don't know what happens in this building? He turned around, his face harder now. I built this company from nothing. I know every rumor, every rivalry, every petty grudge. If something was going on with my daughter, I'd know. I stood up. Okay. Okay. If you say it's nothing, it's nothing. He studied me, trying to figure out if I was being sincere or patronizing. I kept my face blank. Finally, he nodded. Good. Then let's drop it. And Ethan, don't bring this up with Vanessa again. She doesn't need the stress. Understood. I left his office and walked back downstairs. Mara Jensen was in the break room, pouring coffee from the industrial pot that always tasted burned after 9 a.m. She was maybe late 30s, operations manager, the kind of competent that made her invisible until something broke and everyone realized she was the only one who knew how to fix it. Morning, she said without looking up. Morning. You look like hell. Thanks. She glanced at me, smirked. Trouble in paradise? I didn't answer. Just grabbed a mug, filled it with the bad coffee. Mara leaned against the counter, watching me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what? That you're the last to know. I froze, mug halfway to my mouth. Know what? Come on, Ethan. Everyone knows. Well, everyone except Rick, apparently. Or maybe he does know, and he just doesn't care. Everyone knows what? She lowered her voice. Vanessa and Brandon. It's been going on since July. Maybe longer. They're not exactly subtle. The coffee tasted like ash. Why didn't anyone tell me? Would you have believed them? I didn't have an answer. Mara sighed. Look, I like you. You're one of the few people here who doesn't treat me like the help. So I'm going to give you some advice. Whatever you're planning to do about this, do it smart. Vanessa's Rick's golden child. You go after her directly, Rick will side with her and you'll be out. But if you make it about company liability, about protecting the business, she shrugged, then it's not personal, it's professional. Why are you helping me? Because Vanessa pushed me out of 3 strategy meetings last quarter because she didn't like my tone. And because watching people get what they deserve is one of life's small pleasures. She patted my shoulder and walked out, leaving me alone with my terrible coffee and the sudden understanding that I wasn't just fighting my wife. I was fighting the entire structure that protected her. But unlike everyone else in this building, I actually own the structure. I just hadn't told anyone yet. The weekend passed in a strange fog, a haze that seemed to blur time and memory, making the hours stretch and contract in ways that were disorienting and yet intoxicating in their quiet terror. Vanessa had left early Saturday morning, moving through the house with a precision that suggested both purpose and practiced casualness. She carried a small, nondescript bag, one that seemed too light for any real overnight stay, but she had explained it with an ease that made it almost believable. A quick visit to a college friend in Minneapolis, a brief weekend to reconnect, nothing more. She promised she'd be back by Sunday night, added a casual, almost dismissive, "Don't wait up," and it was spoken with a smile that was meant to be playful, but which now, in retrospect, carried a subtle edge of dismissal, a hint of something she thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. There was a rhythm to our lives, an unspoken understanding that some things were left unsaid, some truths carefully tucked into the corners of daily routines. I simply nodded, kissed her cheek, soft, fleeting, a gesture that masked the tension coiling beneath, and watched as she got into her car and drove away. The moment the taillights disappeared around the corner, an almost imperceptible shift occurred in me, a tightening of focus, a pulling of instincts that had been simmering quietly under the surface. I didn't sit idle. I didn't wait, as she suggested. I got into my own car, slid behind the wheel, and followed her. It wasn't Minneapolis I trailed her toward. Not the highways, not the airports, none of the obvious routes she had implied. I followed her downtown, through streets I knew well but never truly noticed during the bustle of normal life. The city had a pulse, a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate in guiding me to the destination I had already intuited. And there it was, the Riverside Hotel, looming quietly yet unmistakably, a structure that radiated both elegance and secrecy. I didn't park, I didn't enter, I didn't need to. I drove past slowly, careful not to draw attention, my eyes fixed on the garage entrance, 4th level. That was where her car was, precisely where I expected it, parked next to Brandon's. The sight of Brandon's wrapped Audi, pristine and polished, made my stomach knot in ways I hadn't anticipated. The image was simple, yet devastating, a silent testament to the truth I had been avoiding, but knew I had to confront. I didn't confront it immediately. I drove home instead. The streets passed by in a blur, the normalcy of suburban Saturday life clashing violently with the storm of thoughts in my head. Once home, I retreated to the sanctuary of my study, a room that had always been organized, almost obsessively so, but now became a staging ground for something far darker, far more methodical. I spent the rest of Saturday meticulously organizing documents, printing emails, constructing a folder of evidence. Every sheet of paper, every email, every record I compiled was deliberate, a brick in the foundation of something that had been building quietly over months. It wasn't about catching them in a compromising situation, not in the way that would satisfy petty revenge or baser instincts. No, it was about accountability, about the tangible, measurable violations that couldn't be argued away. Conflicts of interest, irregularities in expense reports, tiny discrepancies in corporate policy that, when accumulated, formed an undeniable narrative. Every action, every note I made was aimed at exposing a structure of mismanagement, deceit, and ethical lapses that had been allowed to fester, unchecked, all under the veneer of professionalism and charm. By Sunday, the weight of anticipation had shifted into something colder, more deliberate. I went to the office, alone, a silent observer of the world that bustled around me, but felt entirely irrelevant. I swiped my badge, the familiar click and hum of the security system, marking a threshold into a space that was both mine and a theater for my intentions. The building was empty, the usual hum of printers, chatter, and footsteps replaced by a cavernous silence that pressed in, almost approvingly, as if the walls themselves recognized the gravity of what I was about to undertake. I walked through hallways that were familiar, yet now felt charged, each step deliberate, a quiet drumbeat marking the rhythm of my plan. I reached my office, the windowless space where light from the fluorescent ceiling panels cast a harsh, almost clinical glow, and I sat. I opened my laptop, fingers poised, heart measured but alert. What I was about to do was simple in its execution yet monumental in its consequences. I drafted a memo, short, precise, brutally efficient, 2 pages that cut to the core of the issues, leaving no room for misinterpretation or emotional embellishment. Bullet points, crisp, cold, factual. The subject line was clinical, a mask of professionalism for the storm I was unleashing. Personnel restructuring proposal, risk mitigation. It was a document designed to appeal to logic, to accountability, to the need for safeguarding the company from internal risks. Every word was chosen to reflect objectivity, every statement backed by evidence meticulously gathered over hours of preparation. I reviewed it again and again, not for emotion, not for satisfaction, but for clarity. This memo was not just a report, it was a statement, a declaration that the actions of certain individuals could no longer be ignored, that the veil of personal relationships, charm, and influence could not shield them from scrutiny. By the time Vanessa returned Sunday night, the evening sun casting long shadows across the living room, I was ready. She entered the house, a faint scent of hotel soap clinging to her hair slightly tousled, her eyes carrying the effortless calm of someone who believed in the narrative she had spun. She spoke casually about traffic in Minneapolis, about delays that had supposedly extended her trip, about nothing significant enough to warrant attention. She smiled, kissed me, and moved through the space with her usual grace. But I had already acted. The memo had been sent. The email delivered to Rick, flagged as urgent, a subtle yet undeniable signal that the matter demanded immediate attention. The culmination of Saturday's meticulous efforts had come to fruition without fanfare, without confrontation, without spectacle. It was a quiet victory, methodical and inevitable. The house, which had been filled with tension earlier, seemed almost normal again, but the undercurrent of what had transpired lingered, palpable and electric. I moved through the motions of ordinary domesticity with the precision of someone who had already won a battle the other party didn't even know had been fought. We ate, spoke in measured tones, laughed lightly at the trivialities of the day, yet beneath it all was a layer of calculated observation. I watched her gestures, her expressions, each one now filtered through the lens of what I knew and had documented. The duality of appearances and reality had never been so stark. The very same person who could lie with such effortless poise, who could manipulate the perception of time, distance, and intent, was now operating under the shadow of consequences I had set into motion with absolute clarity. The quiet tension persisted into the night. I found myself reflecting on the nature of accountability, of how power and influence could obscure ethical boundaries, and how easy it was for personal relationships to cloud professional judgment. The act of documenting, of preparing the memo, of creating an irrefutable trail of evidence became more than a means to an end. It was a framework for understanding human behavior under pressure, for dissecting the interplay between personal desires and professional obligations. Each bullet point in that memo was not merely a notation, it was a crystallization of truth, a tangible manifestation of diligence and foresight. I thought about the cascading effects this could have, the ripple through the office, the inevitable confrontations, and the realignment of priorities it would force. Yet I also thought about the emotional landscape, the subtle power shifts, the knowledge that I had observed and acted while others remained oblivious. Even as Vanessa moved about the house with casual elegance, unaware of the documentation that now defined her actions in black and white, I was already planning the next steps. The memo was the first layer, the initial assertion of control through evidence. What came next would be a careful calibration of timing, strategy, and response. HR would need to be involved, certainly, and the investigation, once initiated, would demand a level of precision that mirrored the work I had already done. There was a satisfaction in the foresight, a subtle thrill in the recognition that careful, patient preparation could yield results far beyond immediate gratification. It was a form of power that was quiet, almost invisible, yet absolute in its effectiveness. As the night deepened, the house settled into the rhythm of ordinary life, but I remained vigilant. The documents lay neatly organized, a silent arsenal, each folder a repository of truth, waiting for its due consideration. I moved among them, reviewing, adjusting, contemplating how best to frame subsequent communications, ensuring that every word, every fact, every implication was airtight. This was no longer about betrayal or suspicion. It had evolved into a methodical orchestration of accountability, a demonstration of how measured, deliberate action could impose structure upon chaos. The knowledge of what had occurred at the Riverside Hotel, the juxtaposition of perceived innocence and documented reality, weighed heavily, but it was a weight that informed rather than burdened, that guided rather than distracted. By the time Vanessa finally retired for the night, the house was quiet, the shadows long, and the evidence solid. I lingered in the office a while longer, not out of obsession, but out of necessity, reviewing every detail, confirming that nothing had been overlooked. The rhythm of preparation, the discipline of documentation, and the clarity of purpose had created a framework that was almost self-sustaining, a structure within which every subsequent action could be precise and effective. It was a night defined by quiet vigilance, by the intersection of personal observation and professional rigor, by the deliberate transformation of suspicion into undeniable fact. As I finally shut the laptop, the glow of the screen fading into darkness, I felt the full weight of what had been accomplished. The weekend, once shrouded in fog, had become a crucible of clarity. Vanessa's deception, subtle and practiced, had been met not with emotion, but with methodical observation. The foundation for action had been laid. The memo, now sent, was a marker in time, an irrevocable step toward accountability. The rhythm of the house, the ordinary gestures of evening life, the faint scent of hotel soap, all now existed alongside the undeniable truth I had documented. And in that quiet juxtaposition, in the intersection of ordinary and extraordinary, the weekend's strange fog finally lifted, revealing a landscape of deliberate strategy, disciplined observation, and the precise articulation of consequence. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability, the kind that presses down on the chest like a weight too heavy to ignore. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, not because I wanted to, but because I knew that the moment I stepped into Rick's sphere, the confrontation I had been preparing for would demand its due. By 7:45, the building was quiet, the early sunlight filtering through the blinds in long, narrow stripes that cut across the polished floors. The usual hum of early morning activity, the printers warming up, security staff exchanging muted greetings, was muted today, subdued, almost respectful, as if the office itself understood the gravity of what was coming. I had my memo ready on my laptop, though I didn't need it at this moment. The real power was in the preparation, in the meticulous trail of facts and evidence I had gathered over the weekend, each document, each note, each carefully printed email, a silent ally in the confrontation I was about to initiate. Rick called me into his office before 8, and I knew instantly from the tone of his voice that the atmosphere would be tense, sharp, impossible to navigate without precision. He had the memo I had sent him printed out, marked up with a red pen, the ink stark and angry against the crisp white pages. It was laid out on his desk between his coffee, still steaming faintly, and his reading glasses, an arrangement that seemed almost casual, yet the weight of the situation was anything but. The air in the office felt heavier than usual, charged with expectation and unspoken confrontation, like the calm before a storm that had been brewing for months. "Sit," he said, the command more than a suggestion, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made hesitation impossible. I did not argue. I took the chair across from him, the leather cold beneath my palms, feeling the subtle tremor of anticipation in my fingers. The office itself seemed smaller now, the walls pressing in, the bookshelves looming, the diplomas and accolades staring down as witnesses to what was about to unfold. "This," he tapped the memo, his finger striking the paper with a sharpness that conveyed both disbelief and controlled anger. "What the hell is this?" His eyes, usually composed and calculating, now burned with a mix of shock and outrage, the kind that makes you realize that someone has truly misjudged the boundaries of acceptable behavior, at least in their mind. "Risk assessment," I said evenly, each word chosen deliberately. I leaned back slightly, allowing the weight of calm authority to underscore my tone. "You asked me to keep an eye on the Brandon situation." "I asked you to keep an eye, not draft termination papers," he snapped, the sound harsh, almost brittle, like breaking glass. His gaze narrowed, flicking from the memo to me, searching for an explanation that could possibly justify what he was seeing. "It's not termination, it's restructuring," I replied, keeping my voice measured, the tone precise, devoid of emotion that could be misconstrued. Every word I spoke was calculated to maintain control, to assert logic over reaction, to frame the situation in the context of corporate responsibility rather than personal grievance. "You're recommending we suspend Vanessa pending HR review and terminate Brandon immediately for policy violations." His hand threw the memo across the desk with force, the pages fluttering like wounded birds, landing in a heap that demanded attention. "That's termination, Ethan. You're talking about firing people, ruining careers." "It's liability protection," I said, letting the words hang in the space between us, sharp and undeniable. "It's about safeguarding the company from legal exposure, from credibility issues, from conflicts of interest that could collapse trust with clients overnight." His face turned red, the flush spreading across his cheeks and neck, veins standing out as his pulse became visible beneath the surface. "It's my daughter," he said, the words raw, stripped of corporate veneer, the personal intruding into professional reality with a weight that was almost suffocating. His usual composed demeanor cracked under the intensity of emotion, revealing vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "I know," I said simply. There was no judgment in my voice, only acknowledgement, a recognition that the human element could not be ignored, but could also not dictate policy when the stakes were this high. Rick's hands clenched into fists on the desk, his knuckles whitening, his anger simmering in tight, controlled bursts. "You have proof of an inappropriate relationship, photos, witnesses." The question was precise, pointed, demanding, yet underneath it was the fear that the personal and professional were colliding in ways that could devastate both. "I have irregularities in their expense reports," I said calmly, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. "Hotel bookings on corporate cards that don't align with client meeting schedules, overlaps in their travel that suggest coordination, patterns that, once scrutinized by HR, will raise necessary questions." "That's circumstantial," he said, shaking his head, his voice tense, eyes darting, searching for a flaw in my logic, an escape from the undeniable. "It's enough for HR to ask questions," I continued, undeterred. "And once HR asks questions, clients hear about it. And once clients hear about it, we have a credibility problem. This isn't about vengeance. It's about risk mitigation and the survival of the business." Rick stood abruptly, pacing to the window, as he often did when grappling with complex, uncomfortable truths. He looked down at the docks below, the same view he had taken on Friday, a visual escape into the familiar while wrestling with chaos just out of sight. "You're doing this because you're angry at your wife," he said without turning, the accusation hanging in the air, almost bitter in its assumption. "I'm doing this because it's the right thing for the company," I said, my voice firm, unwavering, the conviction in my words a stabilizing counterpoint to the storm around us. "Bullshit," he shot back, spinning around to face me now, the intensity of his gaze cutting through the pretense. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension, each breath measured, each heartbeat loud in its clarity. I stayed quiet. Silence can be more powerful than words, and in this case, it allowed the weight of truth to settle without distraction. He finally spoke again, softer this time, almost weary. "What do you want, Ethan?" The question was deceptively simple, but the gravity behind it made it monumental. A fork in the road where the next answer would define the course of the company and our lives. "I want to protect the business," I replied. Straightforward, logical, the response framed in corporate rationale. "No, what do you really want?" His eyes pierced through the professional facade, seeking the personal motivation that might undermine the legitimacy of my actions. I met his gaze, unflinching. "I want you to sign this memo authorizing me to act as interim head of sales and accounts development in the event of an HR investigation. Temporary measure, just until we sort this out." My words were precise, deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. A calculated step to consolidate authority and protect the company without unnecessary confrontation. "And if I don't," he asked, the faintest edge of panic now seeping into his voice. "Then I'll take it to the board," I said quietly, a calm that belied the seriousness of the threat. "We don't have a board," he said, incredulous, the statement almost defensive, a shield against the implications of my next revelation. "We have an advisory group of 3 guys who rubber stamp whatever I tell them." "Actually," I said, lowering my voice, letting the words land with the weight of inevitability, "you have a board of 1, me, and 2 guys who advise me." Rick's face went blank. The recognition of reality seemed to strike him with the force of lightning, the years of assumed control suddenly revealed as a veneer over a structure he had long misunderstood. "What?" His voice was small, incredulous, almost childlike in its vulnerability. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and slid the PDF across the desk toward him. "Corporate Structure Memorandum," I said, my tone quiet, unyielding. "Signed by you 6 years ago when the company almost went under and I bailed you out. 77% voting interest transferred to me through a holding LLC. You kept minority shares and CEO title, but the actual ownership, that's mine." He picked up the phone, his fingers trembling, scrolling through the document, reading the words that redefined every assumption he had held for years. His hand shook visibly, the grip on the desk tightening and loosening in alternation, betraying the storm of disbelief, fear, and dawning comprehension that overtook him. "You've known this whole time," he said finally, a whisper that was both accusatory and awed. "Yes," I said simply, the affirmation devoid of triumph, only the stark truth of calculated timing. "And you never said anything," he murmured, the words tinged with betrayal and awe. "I didn't need to," I said, letting the finality of the statement hang in the air like a tangible weight. "Not until now." "Why now?" he demanded, the desperation creeping into his voice, the tension pulling taut between us. "Because now I do," I said. The clarity, the timing, the inevitability were all aligned. This was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of responsibility, of precision, of the necessary alignment of authority with reality. He set the phone down as if it were made of fragile glass, the weight of the revelation pressing on him, bending him with its magnitude. "Vanessa doesn't know," he said quietly, almost as if stating it aloud, might make it more real, more manageable. No, I said, simple, factual, leaving no room for further misinterpretation. Why didn't you tell her? He asked, the question heavy with personal implication, the intertwining of family and corporate responsibility crashing into him. Because I thought we were happy, I said, my tone neutral but firm, a statement of fact rather than emotion. I stood, the movement deliberate, signaling the shift from conversation to decision, from explanation to action. Sign the memo, Rick. Give me interim authority. Let me handle this quietly, or don't, and I'll do it loudly. Your choice. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time, the man who had long assumed control, suddenly confronted with a new reality, a new balance of power. Who are you? He asked, voice barely above a whisper, the question weighted with incredulity and awe. I'm the guy who owns your company, I said, my voice steady, unflinching. I've always been that guy. You just forgot. Rick picked up the pen, his hand trembling visibly as he signed the memo. Each stroke of ink was hesitant yet final, the paper absorbing the moment, the affirmation, the surrender of assumed authority. His hand shook the entire time, a visible manifestation of the weight of realization, the acknowledgement of a truth long obscured by appearances and trust. As he set the pen down, the room felt different. The air had shifted, heavier now with accountability, with the undeniable truth of authority finally aligned with ownership. The moment was not triumphant in the emotional sense. It was precise, deliberate, inevitable. And with the signed memo in hand, the path forward was clear, the alignment of responsibility, authority, and truth complete, the consequences set into motion with methodical certainty. By Wednesday, everyone knew something was happening. You could feel it in the building. The way conversation stopped when I walked into a room. The way people checked their phones constantly, refreshing email, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Vanessa had been trying to call me since Monday night. 17 missed calls. 30 texts ranging from, what's going on, to call me now. I didn't. Tuesday morning I'd arrived before her, called an emergency leadership meeting, and used Rick's signed memo to place her on paid administrative leave pending an HR review of potential policy violations. She'd screamed, actually screamed, in the conference room, in front of 3 senior managers and Rick, who sat there looking at his hands like they belonged to someone else. You can't do this to me, she'd said, tears streaming, voice raw. I'm top performer. I've done nothing wrong. The review will determine that, I'd said calmly. What review? What policy violations? I'd slid a folder across the table, printed expense reports, hotel bookings, travel overlaps, her relationship with Brandon highlighted in yellow. This is harassment, she'd whispered. This is procedure. She'd looked at her father. Dad, say something. Rick had looked at me instead, and said nothing. She'd left the building in tears, filmed by half the sales floor on their phones, and by Tuesday night the whole thing was on the office gossip circuit. Brandon had been terminated the same day. I'd handled it personally. Called him into my office, presented the same evidence, gave him 2 options: resign quietly with severance, or be terminated for cause and lose everything. He'd chosen resignation. This is insane, he'd said, voice cracking. We didn't do anything wrong. You're in a direct report relationship with your manager. That's a policy violation regardless of whether anything physical happened. You know that. You signed the employee handbook. Vanessa said you didn't matter. She said you were just her father's assistant. I'd smiled. Vanessa was wrong. Now it was Wednesday, and I was standing in the parking garage at 9 p.m., waiting. I'd sent Brandon a text from an unlisted number. Simple message. We need to talk about severance. Parking garage. Level 4. Come alone. He showed up at 9:15, looking around nervously, keys in hand. When he saw me leaning against his Audi, he stopped. What is this? He said. A conversation. I've got nothing to say to you. That's fine. You can just listen. He looked around, calculating whether he could get back to his car. I was standing between him and the driver's door. Move, he said. Not yet. I'll call security. Building security reports to me. His jaw tightened. What do you want? I pushed off the car, walked toward him slowly. He backed up a step, then forced himself to stop, trying to look tough. I want you to understand something, I said. You thought you were clever. Sleeping with the boss's daughter, getting promoted faster than your competence deserved, driving a car you can't actually afford. You thought you were winning. I wasn't sleeping with her. Brandon, don't. He swallowed. I stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this city. I don't care where you go. You're going to tell anyone who asks that Vanessa was unstable, that you ended things because she was inappropriate, and that you left Mercer Industrial because you wanted a fresh start. You're not going to badmouth the company. You're not going to contact Vanessa. You're not going to talk to reporters if any of this becomes public. You're just going to disappear. Or what? Or I make sure every company in this industry knows you falsified sales numbers to impress your manager. Which you did, by the way. I've checked your reports. You've been padding metrics for 6 months. His face went pale. That's fraud, Brandon. Career-ending fraud. The kind that follows you forever. But if you do what I'm asking, I'll let it slide. You get your severance, you get your dignity, and you get to start over somewhere else. All you have to do is walk away. You're insane. I'm practical. He tried to move past me. I stepped into his path. We were close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the sweat on his upper lip. Move, he said again. Make me. He shoved me, both hands hard into my chest. I let him. Didn't fight back, just absorbed it, stayed standing, then smiled. Feel better? He swung. Sloppy, telegraphed, the punch of someone who'd never actually been in a fight. I ducked sideways, let his momentum carry him forward, then grabbed his wrist and twisted, torquing his shoulder until he gasped and dropped to one knee. Here's the thing about evolution, Brandon, I said quietly, holding his wrist at an angle that made his eyes water. It's not about being the strongest. It's about adapting faster than the other guy. I let him go. He stumbled back, cradling his arm. Then I pulled my keys out and dragged them down the side of his car. Slow, deliberate, a long silver wound through the wrap from door to tail light. He stared at the damage, mouth open, unable to process what had just happened. That's to help you remember, I said. Next time you think about calling Vanessa, or talking to a lawyer, or doing anything except disappearing, remember how easy it was for me to do that, and imagine what else I'm capable of. I walked away. Behind me, I heard him start to cry. Vanessa came home Thursday night. I'd changed the locks Tuesday, but she still had keys to the building, so she buzzed until I let her in. She looked terrible. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in 2 days ago. We need to talk, she said. Okay. Not here. Somewhere public. Why? Because I don't trust you anymore. That almost made me laugh. All right. Where? The restaurant, where we had dinner last week. Rick's place. It's not his place, Ethan. It's just a restaurant. Fine. When? Now. I grabbed my jacket. We drove separately. When I arrived, she was already in the same booth, same seat, like she could rewind the week by sitting in the exact spot where everything went wrong. I slid in across from her. The waitress came by. Vanessa ordered wine. I ordered water. We waited in silence until the drinks arrived. Then Vanessa said, I'm not going to apologize. I didn't ask you to. You destroyed my career. You violated company policy. I fell in love with someone. Her voice cracked. That's not a crime. It is when he reports to you. We were careful. No, you weren't. She looked down at her wine glass, turning it slowly. Brandon won't answer my calls. He's gone. What do you mean gone? He resigned, left the city. You won't hear from him again. Her head snapped up. What did you do? I gave him a choice. He chose survival. You threatened him. I clarified his options. She stared at me and I watched her recalibrate. She'd thought I was weak, passive, the guy who sat in the corner and didn't fight back. Now she was realizing she'd been wrong. I want a divorce, she said. Okay. I'm taking half of everything. No. That's how divorce works, Ethan. Not when you're unemployed and I own the company you thought was your father's. Her face went blank. What? I pulled out my phone, opened the same PDF I'd shown Rick, slid it across the table. She read it slowly, looked up, read it again. This is fake, she whispered. It's not. My father would never. Your father was desperate. The company was hemorrhaging money. I bailed him out. In exchange, he gave me controlling interest. That was 6 years ago. He didn't tell you because it would hurt his pride. I didn't tell you because I thought we were building something together. You manipulated him. I saved him. You lied to me. No, I just didn't correct your assumptions. Her hands were shaking. I'm still entitled to half in a divorce. Actually, no. The shares are held in a premarital trust. You've got no claim. And since you're currently suspended for policy violations, you've got no income, no leverage, nothing. She stood up abruptly, the table rocking, wine sloshing. You did this. You planned this whole thing. You wanted to ruin me. I wanted you to stop humiliating me. There's a difference. I loved you. You loved what I could give you, security, access to your father, permission to pretend you were building something when really you were just spending my money and sleeping with kids young enough to make you feel important. She slapped me. The restaurant went quiet. Every head turned. The waitress froze mid-pour at another table. I just sat there, cheeks stinging, looking at her. Feel better? I asked. She hit me again. Same cheek, harder. I still didn't move. You're pathetic, she hissed. Maybe, but I'm pathetic with 77% of a company and a voice memo of you committing assault. So where does that leave you? Her face crumpled. She sank back into the booth, covering her mouth with her hand. I'll talk to my father, she said. He'll fix this. He already knows. He's known since Monday. He chose the company. You're lying. Ask him. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Dialed. Waited. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. He's not going to save you, Vanessa. Nobody is. She looked at me, tears streaming, mascara running. I hate you. I know. I'll ruin you. You can try. She stood up again, grabbed her purse, and walked out. I sat there for a while, drinking water, ignoring the stares. Then I paid the bill and went home. Friday morning, exactly 1 week since the family dinner. Rick called an emergency all-staff meeting. Announced effective immediately, pending an internal review, he was stepping back from day-to-day operations. Ethan Cole would assume the role of interim CEO. The warehouse floor erupted in whispers. Vanessa wasn't there. She'd been formally terminated Thursday night. HR violation, documented policy breach, irreconcilable conduct. The letter was already in her email, CC'd to her lawyer. Mara stood in the back of the crowd, arms crossed, watching me with something that might have been respect. After the meeting, as people filed out, murmuring to each other, Rick pulled me aside. I need to know something, he said quietly. Did you plan this from the beginning? No. When did you decide? When she let Brandon insult me at dinner and said nothing. He nodded slowly. She's my daughter. I know. I should hate you for this. Probably. But I don't. He looked around the warehouse floor, at the business he'd built, the legacy he'd almost destroyed. You saved this place, twice. Once 6 years ago, and now again by cutting out the rot before it spread. It's just business, Rick. No, it's not. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as my father-in-law, not as my boss. just as an old man who'd chosen his company over his child and was trying to live with it. You're a better man than me. I don't think that's true. It is, because I would have just ignored it, pretended everything was fine until it all collapsed. You had the spine to do what needed to be done. He shook my hand and walked away. I stood alone on the warehouse floor, listening to the radio playing overhead, the sound of forklifts moving pallets, the ordinary noise of a business that would open tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. And I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not revenge, not even anger. Just a cold, empty certainty that I'd won something that no longer mattered. Vanessa came to the office one last time on Monday. Security called to tell me she was in the parking lot, refusing to leave until she spoke to me. I went down. She was sitting on the hood of her car, arms wrapped around herself, looking small and broken in the October cold. I need to get my stuff, she said when she saw me. HR boxed it. I'll have it delivered. I want to get it myself. You're trespassed. You can't enter the building. She laughed, bitter and hollow. Trespassed, from my own father's company. It's not your father's company. Right, it's yours. She looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me? Yes. Then how could you do this? You did it first. I made a mistake, Ethan. People make mistakes. That doesn't mean you get to destroy their entire life. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose him over me. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to treat me like I was nothing. And when I finally responded, you acted like I was the villain. You are the villain. Maybe, but I'm the villain who wins. She slid off the hood, walked up close, looked up at me. You'll regret this. I already do. That stopped her. What? I regret trusting you. I regret thinking love was enough. I regret wasting 6 years on someone who saw me as a prop instead of a partner. But I don't regret this. What happened here? This was just me finally understanding the game. What game? The one you were playing the whole time. She hit me. One more time. Open palm, right across the face, hard enough to echo in the parking garage. I didn't flinch. Security was already moving toward us. I waved them back. Vanessa's hand was shaking. I hope you're happy. I'm not, but I'm not yours anymore. And that's enough. She started crying. Real broken sobs. Sank down against her car, buried her face in her hands. I watched for a moment, then I turned and walked back inside. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office. Rick's old office. Corner view, big windows, the whole legacy package. Mara knocked on the doorframe. Got a minute? She asked. Sure. She came in, closed the door, sat down across from me. Vanessa's lawyer called. She's dropping the divorce contest, taking the settlement offer. Good. She's also moving to Denver. New job. Sales position at some startup. How'd she get that? I wrote her a reference, called in a favor. I looked at her. Why? Mara shrugged. Because she's broken enough, and because you're not as cold as you pretend to be. Yes, I am. No, you're not. If you were, you would have destroyed her completely. Instead, you gave her enough rope to rebuild. That's not cold. That's just... done. She stood up, walked to the door, paused. For what it's worth, you're a good CEO. The staff respects you. Numbers are up. Rick's happier retired than he ever was running this place. You did the right thing. Doesn't feel like it. It never does. That's how you know it was hard. She left. I sat in Rick's chair, in Rick's office, looking out over the warehouse floor that I now controlled completely. Somewhere in Denver, Vanessa was starting over. Somewhere in whatever city Brandon ran to, he was trying to forget. And here I was, sitting in a corner office, alone, successful, powerful, everything I thought I wanted, nothing I actually needed. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, stopped at Vanessa's name. My thumb hovered over the call button. Then I deleted her number. turned off the phone, and got back to work. Because that's what you do when you win. You keep moving, even when there's nowhere left to go. Epilogue, 6 months later, I sold the company. Not to a competitor, to an employee buyout trust, structured so that Mara and the senior staff actually owned the thing they'd spent years building. Rick got his retirement package, golden and generous, enough to spend his remaining years pretending he'd won. I walked away with enough money to never work again. Moved to a smaller city. Bought a house that didn't have floor-to-ceiling windows. Got a dog. Started consulting for small businesses that needed someone to read their books and tell them the truth. I don't talk to Vanessa. Don't think about her much anymore. Sometimes I wonder if she's happy in Denver, if she found someone new, if she tells them the story of her first husband, the quiet guy who turned out to be something else. I don't wonder long, because I learned something in that warehouse, in that corner office. In the moment, I realized I'd won a game I never wanted to play. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about realizing you don't need them anymore. And the day Vanessa stopped mattering was the day I finally understood what freedom meant. Not power, not money, not winning. Just the quiet, ordinary peace of knowing I'd survived something terrible, and I didn't have to carry it anymore. I put it down, and I walked away.